Hello, welcome to the Better Outcomes Show, where we explore the possibilities of a new healthcare. Each episode, we bring you a conversation with leaders across the healthcare industry, exploring topics ranging from new treatment techniques and interventions to novel service delivery methods and business models. And now your host, Rafi Salazar from Rehab U Practice Solutions, a leader in patient engagement and retention strategy. Let's explore the possibilities of a new healthcare.
Well, hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm excited to bring, I think I say this every time, I'm excited to bring this interview to you. But we got some good guests on this show, so I'm excited to bring this one to you. Darren Schwindaman is the principal and owner of a design and branding studio called Creative Distillery. Now, he and I got connected doing some work on a couple marketing things here and there, a couple positioning like boot camps. And I ended up, I really liked his deal and the way he approached his business. So what he does essentially is knowledge translation. So he helps purpose-driven organizations, academic institutions, people that have ideas, the idea generators of our society, and he helps them through marketing, through the principles of effective communication. He helps them bring their ideas to bear on the world. So I really, really liked just talking with him about this whole idea. You know, we hear about it in the medical space, in the academic realm, if you happen to be teaching at an institution. We talk about this idea of knowledge translation, and at least on our part, so I sit on the board of directors for the National Board for Occupational Therapy for NBCOT, and I hear this kind of conversation there and at academic levels here at the university that I teach at. And it seems very much that knowledge translation, quote unquote, the way that it is seen on the part of the idea generators or the researchers or the academic institutions supporting them, knowledge translation in and of itself is a very academic thing. So we talk about, well, what's the research behind getting, this idea to market? And it still stays very, very high level, very academic. What Darren and his group does is very much the practical. So they take this idea of knowledge translation, of getting an idea to the masses effectively, and they build campaigns for their clients around that. So it takes it much more from a high-level academic overview really down to earth, so we can discuss what are the practical things if I've got an idea, if I've got a new treatment method, or I even just want some buy-in from clients, what can I do to get them to adopt it or to get the idea from outside of this academic area or this academic arena where it doesn't have a lot of application to daily life, and how do I make it so that it can impact the world, right? The worst thing that we can do is have great ideas sitting on the bookshelf somewhere. And even in healthcare, I think the latest figures are something like it takes 17 years for best practice in the research to make it down to everyday clinical practice. So people like Darren, groups like Creative Distillery are doing their part to help shorten that window. So I'm very excited to talk with Darren about it. Hopefully you pull some nuggets and insights out of this interview, even in your own practice, your own marketing. How do I communicate an idea effectively? So without further ado, here is Darren Schwindaman, and we are talking about knowledge translation. So, hey Darren, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, Rafi, thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Like we're recording on a Friday, so I think we're all just sort of coming down off the week and getting ready for what comes next.
Exactly. Yeah. At least for me, with my 4 kids, Father's Day is coming up, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. They owe you one for that day. So.
Exactly. So before we get too deep, tell us a little bit about yourself and then your firm, Creative Distillery.
Sure. So my name is Darren, and I went to school at Loyola University in New Orleans. It's a Jesuit school, and they kind of have a tradition for social justice. And I studied graphic design, kind of grew up as an art kid, and was looking into that. And really the place where that all intersected was in college, where the teaching was not just about sort of what, how do you make things and all that, but what are you making it for? What's happening with this as it goes out into the real world? And so since leaving college, I've worked in journalism a little bit as a designer, and then basically formed a freelance design practice. And my wife is a writer and moved in with me, and we started working together. And that created a set of disciplines around it that grew into an agency, which is Creative Distillery. So we're a marketing firm. We're based in Jackson, Mississippi, but we do work for clients all over. And I kind of call us a sort of multidisciplinary brand or marketing firm, because we've dealt with topics that are kind of complex. I found that having to add disciplines to what we do meant adding staff people or adding capabilities in-house, because that the knowledge is kind of complicated to have contractors sort of dip in and out of it or treat it as a technical project. We want to treat everything as a content project first.
Okay. Yeah, well, that makes a little bit of sense. And part of the reason we got connected was this whole idea of what we call knowledge translation. And I know you've done some of this work with researchers, right? You help them take their what we call good ideas or whatever comes out of research and help them get it to their audience, or make these ideas go from kind of the stuffy halls of academia into the real world. So for those of us who might not have already heard, when we talk about knowledge translation, what do you define it as?
That's great. So first off, just full credit to you. The term knowledge translation came to me through you. So full shout out, props there. It is work that we've been doing for a long time. And I hear a variation on it called research impact as well. Uh-huh. But the way that we think about it is simply taking this knowledge that has been developed by subject matter experts or researchers or whomever and putting it to work. To me, it is not complete until it is out in the world, actively working, helping people, improving people's lives. I think that's when people are developing new research, developing new knowledge, that's what they're trying to do. And I think that the communications side of that is an important part of that. And so knowledge translation, in a sense, is all the processes and distributions and ways that knowledge gets out and sort of concludes when it is actually implemented.
Yeah, because I think, especially in the healthcare field, we talk about, how do we do evidence-based practice, or how do we take, what's best practice from the literature and apply it to clinical settings. And most of the research that I'm seeing coming out of, all the recent, probably in the last 5-10 years, is that it takes roughly somewhere between like 10 and 17 years for research findings that are grounded in evidence to be like daily applied in daily practice, which probably speaks to that key point. Like, how do we message? How do we market? How do we get these ideas out? What do you see on your end as being kind of those barriers? Like, what keeps these ideas that might be really, really good? Like the research shows, oh, you do this treatment and it saves you this much money and patients get quicker, faster. Like, what keeps that idea from being mainstreamed?
Absolutely. So I have just an intrinsic sort of gut level frustration to know that there is knowledge out there that is not being put to work.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think the studies I had read had called it like research lag or something. The sort of lag time between the knowledge being developed, put into practice. Just unacceptable, basically, like on an emotional level to me. In terms of what causes that, I think it's a lot of things. I mean, there are, so we've done work for a client that is a sort of a reproductive healthcare access project. And so the systems, they talk a lot about sort of interacting systems. And so for a woman who goes to a doctor's office, to be presented with all the sort of available options for her reproductive care, the doctor has to know what those are, has to keep them in stock, has to know the right code to bill insurance for that. Yeah, and those are all places where things sort of break down. Those systems don't necessarily talk to each other. So I think that's one huge thing, is people just come at their problems from different vantage points, and there's rarely a single entity that is in charge of solving an entire problem. So they're sort of charged with, maybe they develop a new treatment, but they don't know the first thing about how to convince insurance companies to pay for that. So that in itself opens up a huge type of barrier that might be there that prevents that from, hitting the ground.
The mainspring. Yeah. Well, and especially when you get into things like reproductive care or just cash-based practice in general, that already puts a big barrier. I'm sympathetic to, because of the work that I've been doing with people with disabilities, like just access to care. And when you start talking about, well, now we have to find a way to pay for it, and insurance doesn't want to pay for it, which means the people that are wanting it or needing it sometimes just can't afford it. So yeah, that could be its own show in and of itself, right? Like, how do we make these things affordable? But besides this complex system where we got different units or different structures or organizations talking to each other or not talking to each other, are there any barriers within, let's say, a research organization that might prevent their ideas from coming out? Like, let's say I'm a researcher in a lab and I come up with this great piece of information, whatever it is, I can cure cancer or whatever. Like, why might that be just stuck in my building or my organization as opposed to making its way out towards the broader community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that first off, I think if you invented a cure for cancer, that would probably find a way to get out there. Yeah, that's a big deal. I think for the researchers that we have worked with, the way that they would experience that, I sometimes call it like a blind spot, in a sense, where they know so much. And I just enjoy this. I enjoy being around smart people. I enjoy being around experts. I enjoy learning new things. And from our vantage point, we get to just see kind of behind the curtain of a lot of different things. Common things, I think, is that they know their stuff. They know what they're talking about. In some ways, I think where a blind spot emerges is they know so much about it that these conclusions are really obvious to them. And it kind of becomes difficult for them to get into the headspace of an audience that either doesn't know that information or has some maybe like identity reason or just some reason that they're not in agreement or they're not wanting to adopt it. And I mean, just an example that we're sort of dealing with at the time that we're recording this is that we have a ton of studies out. We pretty much know that like wearing a mask the time of sort of COVID-19, easiest thing to do. We can all sort of keep the economy going. We can move around, just wear the mask. But people don't want to do it. And, that's in a sense, that's a good, just quick example of this sort of knowledge translation gap. The knowledge is there. That's we're learning more about this virus every day. We're learning what happens. We have that knowledge, but there is a gap. There's an identity gap among people that don't want to wear masks when they go out. There's a lot of factors to sort of think about. And I think that is where messaging, communications, marketing, branding comes into play and has to wrestle with those issues. So, the person measuring air droplets moving around and sort of, not breaking through masks and stuff like that has the knowledge, but they may not know how to put themselves into the like identity space of someone that sees that mask is imposing on their freedoms in some way. Okay. And that there's work to do there. That's where the work is, in some ways, I think I'm a sort of problem solving oriented person in the sense. And it's like, well, where's the problem? Let's take a look at it and see what we can do. So there's a lot of people working on a lot of problems. I find that my slice of the problem that we can work on is that communications messaging aspect of it.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. I think, oftentimes we hear knowledge translation and we hear, just the idea like there's good research out there that's not being used. Oftentimes, at least the discussions I'm having, in academia and with this national board that I'm involved in is all like, well, how do we fund more research to get the idea out there? But what you bring up is like, there's so many things going on. Like the idea, if I think that wearing a mask is like subjugating myself or whatever, like I'm imposing my freedoms, I'm not going to do it. Like there's no amount of logic, right, that's going to get get somebody in that state of mind to say, okay, I see where you're coming from. And the research does actually show that it's, prevents the spread of this disease or whatever. How do you think, like, just from, let's use this example, like what's the main strategy we should use in something like this, where it's not so much the issue is not around the knowledge itself. It's around almost like an emotional or a visceral response to that knowledge. Like, how can we address that?
That's a great question. It's a real example. It's a concrete example that we see around us every day. I think that and this does speak to the larger issue of how can people with the knowledge put themselves in a headspace? Because if you know through logic and facts and research, it's not really in dispute, right? That the mask it helps. It's the right thing to do.
Exactly. I'm looking at the numbers. You can't fight the numbers.
This fact is true. And yet there is a large percentage of audience out there that does not want to do that. What do we do with that? So I think first you have to empathize with where they're at. And I think it's easy when you know better to say that, one, they just don't know, or two, I'm going to give more facts to them. And I think for some of these really simple things, that's ultimately not going to work. Whether that's the right thing or not, I have a lot of opinions about that, but ultimately it's not going to work. So you have to empathize with where they're at and really dig into what is that sort of headspace that they're in that's refusing that. Can you find something? A lot of times people make decisions based on their identity. And I do think that is a sort of tough thing to reconcile with when you have facts on your side, is, because the researcher is going to approach the situation ideally sort of without assumptions as much as possible. They're going to let the research guide them to what the answer is. There are a lot of people out there that have an answer and then sort of pick and choose research that reinforces that answer they already have, reinforces that identity. So I think what you have to do is understand that identity, take the behavior that you sort of want to see happen, and then you mentioned words like emotion, visceral reactions, those sort of things. That's, I think, where creativity comes into play, and where storytelling and marketing comes into play, is activating those buttons in people to like bring that behavior closer to their identity. So say, you don't have to give up your identity as a free, independent person. You don't have to give up your identity as a masculine person. I mean, the amount of things that people don't do because they think it makes them look gay basically is a lot. I saw a thing that, like, tote bags at the grocery store, there's a lot of people out there that they think that kind of makes them look effeminate in a way. And that, fine. I mean, I don't agree with that, but if that's what the issue is, then fine, we'll make tote bags for men, And I think, but that's where you start to bring it closer to the identity of the audience that you want. I think that researchers, are, there's a lot of stuff that goes out about like elites and things like that. But, researchers are their own kind of person usually, and that may or may not be related to the audience that they're trying to affect in a whole host of ways, and so I think you have to like get yourself into that headspace, see what they have going on. Your audience doesn't eat, sleep, live, and breathe your issue oftentimes. So if you are working on, we did some work for some entities around public education funding on the part of government, for example. We've got a lot of people out there that they don't have school-age kids, or their kids go to private school or whatever.
Yeah,
and
they don't care so much about what's going on.
They don't care. They're not breathing this issue. And so it's really hard to sort of motivate them to act based on that. You have to find some other way to land that message a lot closer to their day-to-day identity. So I think their emotion, empathy, and things like that are not words that are typically found in research, where they're sort of wanting to transcend those things. But yet when you go to have people adopt the behaviors that the research is saying is the right thing to do, those things, I think, sort of come roaring back, and those are really important factors in adopting those behaviors.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge too. I do a lot of work with folks talking about understanding like the behavioral change, the whole idea of behavioral change with their patients. Like, your patient might not be ready to adopt this healthy lifestyle, and this is how we have to basically market, or how we message what you're saying. in order for it to fall kind of, we want to not coerce them, but guide them through like this pre-contemplation, like somebody that might not want to wear a mask because they don't see it's a problem, all the way through, okay, how do we like raise awareness? How do we bring them to this? How do we make them decide to take action? And what you're kind of saying is finding a way to make your message align with their identity almost, right? So finding a way for them to do that, or at least for us to say something in a way that kind of pings something inside of them.
That's absolutely right. And I really think, I mean, at the end of the day, everyone is a person. And so if you are working with, hospital administrators, the sort of finance side and things like that, which you have experience with, they are people, they're making decisions in, the even the sort of research and medical practice people within a hospital have to interact with like a sort of business side and things like that. That's translation. They're still having to figure out how do we activate the things that they are thinking about.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned something a while back, a few minutes ago, about these people that are doing this research, these people that are trying to bring these ideas to the forefront are they're very, very smart people, right? They live, eat, breathe this stuff. They know the numbers. They know the information inside and out. And that sometimes, I don't know, have you read the book by Chip and Dan Heath called Made to Stick?
So my wife is my business partner, and she has read that book, and she tells me about it, and then I do stuff that's in the book because she told me about it.
They talk about that whole idea, this curse of knowledge is what they call it. Like, it so well, you can almost not even remember what it's like to not know this information, right? And I'm assuming just from some of the work that you've done, like, would that be one of the bigger blind spots that you're addressing with clients most often than not?
It absolutely is. The stuff is just so evident to them. They know it, and it's very just difficult to access the headspace of an audience that's not already convinced about the value of what it is they know. Because lots of people have just concerns in their day-to-day life. They got to get the kids off to school, go to work, get some groceries and stuff like that. So they're just not thinking about this stuff at the same level, and especially this sort of causal relationship between whatever social factor, work with people in kind of public health and not, and in other topics too. And same thing, it's, they know, the researchers know that people's lives are affected by this, but they often don't see it from that vantage point. They just see their day-to-day life. And so it just simply accessing that headspace is a blind spot. It's hard for them. And so that's something we try to help them. We ask a lot of questions and really try to bring it back to in-person interactions that they've had. If there's a takeaway from this for the researchers, I would kind of say, make sure that you are having those in-person interactions with people that are affected by this. There's a lot of like surveys done, for example, and that's important, and you need that. I would also say, make sure you're having a conversation with somebody, without pen and paper, without recording things, that sort of thing, where you're really just having that conversation and you're seeing you're getting a sense for what their day is like. You're getting a sense for what is important to them. Because I think you also pick up a ton of valuable stuff there that helps put some context to the data that you're getting.
Yeah. Because going back to that whole idea of identity and emotion, like, reading a survey is great, and it gives you great statistics, and you need that sometimes. But being able to sit at the other end of a table from somebody and realize their lived experience with whatever disease or whatever thing you're studying really makes everything kind of come together. It takes that knowledge, that whole piece of this, like, this is the research, the stuffy academic side, and then this is who it affects, right? And how.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So, research is really good at testing things, but I don't know that research itself is as good at sparking ideas. And I think if you have a conversation with someone, an example here in Mississippi is that there was a really rural part of the state, lots of bad health outcomes in those places, chronic, heart disease and all that. And they were saying, well, people need to walk more. And they talked to this was on an NPR piece, and they talked to the people, and they couldn't go walking because there were these like wild dogs out.
Oh, wow.
And any, who would attack them at the side of the road. And so it's like, okay, well, to start dealing with this sort of chronic health problem, you have to deal with your dog problem in a sense. That's really, really hard to kind of get there. I think research is good at testing things. So maybe you have a conversation with someone. To me, that's a big light bulb because it's so far outside the frame of reference of where you were focused on that now we can go test that and say, okay, access to safe walking trails. Let's do research on that. You can sort of add that into so you can collect data on it. You can collect something you can test, but I don't think you get there. You even get the spark to investigate that without having some sort of conversation with a real person.
Yeah, you're just looking at, people have heart disease, they're overweight, they're not
Yeah.
exercising. So we just need to tell them to exercise.
That's exactly right. Yeah, like, oh, exercise, huh? Like people know that that's important and good. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So what, besides trying to just get in the frame of mind, or maybe even call it like an empathetic frame of mind, like what else can researchers do to help get their ideas out into the mainstream?
Yeah, I think that figuring out how to tell the story of the research in a way that fits where people are. So a lot of what we do is we will help people create a brand around the thing it is that they are marketing. So one of the things we did in Mississippi is they had done a state health assessment, which was a huge survey. It was, I don't know, 20,000 respondents or something like that. A lot of people around perception of health issues. And from that, they created a state health improvement plan. This was to get their state health department accredited by the Public Health Accreditation Board. And they came to us at that point, and we helped them create a brand called Uproot Mississippi, which is a sort of public health brand to take the recommendations in the SHIP, the State Health Improvement Plan. Bureaucracies, organizations use a lot of like acronyms and stuff like that.
Yeah, they do.
They have a lot of words. And so we created a brand called Uproot Mississippi that is squarely aimed at regular people. And that what it does is it takes the real recommendations and filters them through something that I think feels more accessible to regular people. And so I think that considering what branding does for that, take all this stuff and put it to where people are. So Uproot is a brand that lives on social media. So it's there to sort of tag, and then that amplifies extremely local work that's happening. So, walking clubs and things like that are just sort of local things. It engages at their level where they're already at, and then tries to amplify the work they do and figure out what's sort of clonable of that so that communities elsewhere can do that too. So if researchers have knowledge that they can talk about in like popular news, if they can figure out an angle that makes it really relevant, I think that's good. I think that the one thing is it's not just end user audiences. Sometimes you have to figure out how to talk about your material in a way that a legislator will get. We do some work for like forestry commissions. And so frankly, all legislators care about is job creation and economic impact. So when they talk about, right. Yeah. And so when they talk about the impact of their forestry work, it's framed in really bite-sized infographic bits that someone can understand from an economic development point of view. Fine. That's what gets them to apportion the money they need to do all the other stuff too. So being aware, and I think in recent years, researchers and scientists have become much, much more aware of policy, political power, the legislative process, and the way that intersects. And I would say, go assert yourselves at those tables, get there, get in front of people. I think where we can help is to help them do that translation aspect. So there's a sort of line of thought that is aimed towards end user audiences, a line of thought that might be aimed towards policymakers, partners, other stakeholders, stuff like that. But they should be, I have just so much respect for these people because again, I find the material fascinating. And I think that I want to see them be at the table when decisions are being made. That's even better than like
these are the people that should be helping make the decisions, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's absolutely right. Yeah. And even better than the branding of it is like when it becomes recommended law or becomes a policy that has some enforcement behind it. That's what everybody wants,
Yeah. Well, I want to circle back to, I got a couple questions. You kind of mentioned Well, we'll talk about the whole health literacy and accessibility piece first. So you said taking these recommendations, taking all this stuff and filtering it through in a way that makes it more accessible to the end user. I mean, for me, we always, we talk about that in the way of, they call it health literacy. So like so many people know X number of medical terminology in their daily vocabulary. So how can we make the language, more understandable? And I'm assuming that's part of it, but I think you're hinting towards something even deeper, right? It's not just making sure the words are easily read, right?
It's not that's absolutely right. It's not entirely a sort of formal exercise around the phrasing of something. There's lots of clumsy phrasing out there that either gets adopted or vague things that get adopted.
Yeah.
It really is about making it sort of palatable to where someone's identity already is and using that to create a better pathway to sort of where you want them to grow to.
Yeah. Well, and that perfectly dovetails into the next question I had, which was, it just sounds like what you're saying. This is not something that, let's say, I don't know, the Arthritis Institute comes up with recommendations that, like exercise and stretching is good for your joints or whatever. Like this is not something that they can just, you make one kind of global messaging campaign or whatever that they can put out to the whole US or whatever, right? Like, is this something that needs to be more tailored for cities or states, or like how granular should they be thinking when it comes to, okay, I've got this idea. We know that these recommendations don't change for population to population, but the way we message probably does to get adoption. So how granular should they be thinking?
That's great. So that is absolutely like next level stuff, or just a deeper way of doing it. Though I'll come at it from two angles. In some ways, this is still marketing to an audience.
Uh-huh.
If organizations are bound by their scope realities, so like not every organization has a budget to do just a gigantic messaging campaign. You don't have to necessarily do it like that. An example from my previous career working at a newspaper is I would lay out editorial pages, and I would have to put on, like, let's say it was a music listings page, and I would have to put a picture of a band on there for one of the bands that's playing in town this week. And to me, this page was a job. It was a thing I have to do, get it done, move on to the next thing. I did not have a personal investment in which band I put there. The band I put there is the one that had a high quality photo where I could find it on the internet.
Yeah.
And that's what I would put there. That made my day easier. So for the Arthritis Association, in this example, trying to like create content, material, social graphics, infographics, whatever it is, put it out there so that other people share it and show it to their audiences. Guess who is receiving that? People like me trying to like put this thing up. They've got to schedule, 2 posts a day for 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And so if you are creating content that feels relevant to their audience, putting it out where they can find it, then you don't have to spend money to access their audience. They want to do that because you've created something that's valuable to them. So I think when you get really, and this is where the empathy side comes in, who is it that has arthritis? And you start digging into that and say, all right, where do they go? Maybe we, for, senior week or something, senior appreciation and things like that, we start doing that. Grandparents' Day, we put out content that's hashtagged around that, make sure people see it. If you have any kind of, Arthritis Association, as an example, would have affiliates, sort of local affiliates, or have partner organizations or things like that. You could really sort of create content that is targeted to them and sort of filter it out that way.
Yeah. Well, and you're talking a lot about, creating content, hashtags, social media. Do you ever come across clients or organizations, like, let's say it's an academic institute, that you talk about hashtagging in social media and they're like, easy, mister. We don't do the digital space, right?
Right.
Or something like that.
So from sometimes like a sort of organizational point of view, they have a lot of inertia or they're behind, but generally the individual that I'm talking to is personally competent enough in that. So they sort of know what it is. they as an organization may not have figured it out, or they're sort of hampered by the same problems that I think are kind of global to them, where they, it's all important. They don't know how to take all the stuff they have and turn it into a single graphic. So for anyone out there that's doing this kind of communication, I always try to get people to each post or each piece of content should focus on a single thing. I don't think you're going to have the sort of skeleton key content that sort of addresses everything in it. It's too much for people to grab.
Yeah. You're not laying out a 15-point, health plan.
No,
or
yeah,
something like
absolutely.
That.
Yeah. People don't necessarily like to leave the news feed. So they're sort of seeing your stuff in context with other things they're sort of scrolling by. I think the thing to do is to take your stuff, and this is where we come in. We called ourselves Creative Distillery in a sense because we take complicated stuff and distill it down to something more potent, pure, more concentrated. And so I think you have to, over time, get people into your content, your way of thinking, but each specific thing they see is a single coherent, contained thought within itself. And we kind of help people with that, but other people could do that too.
Yeah. So you're almost like, let's say they have this 15-point plan or whatever. Are you breaking each point up into a different post, or are they all kind of coming out sequentially, or does it really not matter? Because like if you're scrolling through Facebook or something like that on any given 3 days in a week, you're not going to see the same content twice, right? So are they really making
that's
those
a great question. Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say that the way that we do it, you cannot assume that a single audience person is going to see your content in the sequence that you put it out there in.
Yeah.
That said, if we had a 15-point plan, so we love getting that from people. I always say you can't really send us too much stuff. Give it to us, we can handle it. A 15-point plan, you could turn that into 15 weeks worth of content. You could do a week on each point and come at it from different sides. So maybe you have a stat, a series of sort of stat infographics. Maybe you have some storytelling that shows this point being implemented in the real world. The other thing we do is we look at sort of real world calendars. So when like you have 4 kids, when summer break happens for school, like your family has to sort of adjust your activities in some way to deal with that. So that's like the thing that's on your mind. When spring break happens, you have to do stuff. When it's holiday time, you enter a different mode of thinking. To me, that's part of like empathizing with the audience, what's going on in their heads and their lives. And then so what we would do is look at the points and try to sort of match them up to where people are already at, and sometimes that's really obvious. Sometimes it's not. But when it's obvious, that's low-hanging fruit, take that, so we try to match that up. So then you're not having to like alter people's behavior so far away from what they're doing already. But you might say, hey, if you're doing this, do this extra thing. And that's helpful.
Yeah. Kind of ties it into what they're already doing almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever come across organizations, or I'm thinking primarily of some conversations I've had in academia where you talk about this whole idea and they're like, well, that's kind of below us. Like we generate the ideas and there should be somebody else that takes care of that. Do you ever run into that idea?
So that's a great question. It's not typically what we're running into, but it does speak to a larger issue that we have. Like basically once someone has committed to hire us, they are valuing this and they know that it's important. They want to be acting on it. However, huge blind spot that we run into is people treat this side of it as a sort of afterthought, or they don't think about it, or they think it's someone else's problem. And so, my response to that would be, if you care about this thing happening in the real world, that caring about the communications of this idea out,
how it gets out there is important, right?
That's got to be it. That's a part of it, right? Because again, just with the mass, we know the knowledge, but it's not being implemented, and so there's issues there around getting the material out there. So, a part of what we really want to do is get people thinking about that. We've seen lots of like sort of grant applications, and someone, gets funded, but they have like all, pages and pages on the sort of project they're going to do. and then there'll be a little thing at the end and like, oh yeah, we're going to make a website about this. And for us, that's like a really big deal. Like we spend a lot of time on that. And so if there's anything I would want, it would be for the people sort of performing the research, generating the ideas, to know that thinking through the communications part of the implementation is part of what they have to be thinking about. Yeah. And I think that
start anybody on day one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like build it in. We did some work for an evaluator, like a sort of professional consulting service that does evaluation, and they kind of run into the same thing. If you're baking in, how is this going to be evaluated into the program design, you guaranteed get better evaluation quality sort of results, because you're setting your program up in a way that can be measured. I would kind of say the same thing with communications. Bake into the beginning how you're going to communicate this, how you're going to get it to the people, what are the systems that need to implement this knowledge, and how are you going to get to them?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Starting from a firm foundation rather than, like you said, tacking it on at the very end. Oh yeah, and we'll do something to get people to hear about it at the end when it's all done, right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and that's just and again, I like this stuff. I want to see it happen in the real world, and we live in a world where people, you can't really compel them to do stuff they don't want to do. So you got to convince them to want to do it.
All right. So what about, we've been talking about institutions and big organizations kind of distilling their ideas down. What about like maybe an independent clinician, somebody that's kind of running a physical therapy shop or something like that, and they know their treatment is really helping people with low back pain? Like, how do they get their message out in a way that is, going to take what they know, how their skills of treatment or whatever, and then maybe compel somebody to give them a call?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that's branding. That is, if the Heimlich maneuver, had like sort of branded that in a sense, he could have done very well, I'm sure. I think he was like 90 when he had to like perform that for the first time.
Oh, really?
Like in a sort of real life situation. His whole life, he never had to. Anyway, I think that's where the value of having something that is proprietary, that is branded, where that treatment itself has value, because, hey, maybe if you're the clinician in that case, you get to license that treatment to other markets, like outside of your sort of territorial market or whatever. And that's great. That's an extra revenue stream for you. So I would say the more you can sort of add value to a specific approach, and certainly in our world of sort of doing consulting, it's a similar approach to us, where you want to sort of add value, add proprietary positioning to what it is that you offer. I would say branding, marketing, all that, those only sort of add value to that independent clinician who's developed a treatment or something like that.
Yeah. All righty. Well, thanks for being here. We've got a few more minutes left. I want to ask you just any last minute thoughts on knowledge translation. I don't know if you wanted the listener to walk away with like, I don't know, a couple, 2-3 big points, because we have to distill it, right? Nothing big.
That's
no
15
point plan. Just a couple big takeaways. What would they be?
Number one is, don't treat this part of it like an afterthought. This part is, an essential part of the process of developing knowledge and putting it out into the world. I don't think anyone is going to work as hard as the people that I know that do this work. I don't think anyone works that hard to not see their insights get out into the world, put into action, improve people's lives. So there is a part of that is a communications part. Don't treat it like an afterthought. That would be my single biggest takeaway.
Okay.
As you sort of open yourself up to that, I think you start to empathize with your audiences. You start to think about what's important to them. And that kind of puts you into the posture to think about how to frame your content, the stuff that you're creating, in a way that's most helpful to them.
All righty. Awesome. Well, where can folks find you, find your website and all that? Social?
That's right. Absolutely. So people can find us at creativedistillery.com. We're on Twitter at CDHQ Branding, Instagram at Creative Distillery, and our Creative Distillery Facebook page is there as well. And we're getting a mailing list going as well. So for people that want to participate in this, we are going to be sending some stuff out there. I am going to be launching soon a survey. So I want to hear from people what their big translation, their sort of knowledge translation, research impact, what their obstacles are, where they're at with it, and create some collections of that data for people. So that's something we're really excited about.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Darren, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Rafi. This has been really great, and I'm excited for your listeners to hear this, and excited to get a window into the conversations that you're having in some of these really high kind of leadership positions and things like that. That's really interesting for me to hear about.
Well, thanks for being here, man.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I know I love talking with folks who are experts at looking at things a little differently, especially in healthcare and in academia and in this industry. It's very easy to kind of be insular, right? We've got our research, we've got our ideas, we've got our quote unquote evidence-based practice. But unless we do something to take that evidence, to take that research, to take those ideas and get them to be adopted by the public, it doesn't do us any good, right? So the idea of being able to take your message and craft it in a way that is going to resonate with your clientele, your patients, your audience, the stakeholders, whatever the case may be, it's definitely a skill that we as idea generators, that we as clinicians who are often in the business of communicating with our patients, with our clients, with our managers, with our administrators, need to be adept at. And I think at least for the vast majority of healthcare providers, this whole idea of how do we market an idea, how do we communicate this idea effectively, how do we use the principles of behavioral psychology, of identity, of even the practical, the tools of the day, the social media, the internet, how do we leverage what we have and communicate it in a way that is going to affect real change? For many healthcare clinicians, many clinicians turned business owner, clinicians turned clinic manager, that idea was never covered for them in their education, in their schooling. We were taught as clinicians to serve people, right? We're taught the technical skills of how to affect change in a patient's life, but oftentimes the marketing idea, if you would, or the marketing communications aspect is really overlooked. So, I mean, I appreciate Darren coming and spending his time and sharing some of his insight with us about it all. And I hope you pulled some practical tips and tricks for even the way he was talking about taking 15-point plans and breaking them out into, that's 15 weeks of content if you play your cards right. Those of you who are running clinics who are thinking about, man, I'm trying to get this content strategy ironed out. I have no idea how to do it or to market it in an effective way. Something like that is a practical thing that you can start doing tomorrow if you wanted to. So, alrighty, guys. If you enjoyed the show, you can head on over to www.betteroutcomes.show and sign up for our subscriber list, and we will send you a copy of the next episode straight to your inbox. We drop episodes or release them every other week. You can also learn more at www.rehabupracticesolutions.com. That's rehab, the letter U, practicesolutions.com. And the tab there for the podcast will give you all the information that you want. If you really like the show and you want to help us out, you can head on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. It helps with SEO. It helps people find the show and hear the message. Guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen and just invest your time in listening to the show. So until the next episode, guys, be healthy, be safe. I will talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the Better Outcomes Show, where we explore the possibilities of a new healthcare. Our hope is that you walk away from each episode informed, equipped, and empowered to push the boundaries in your own practice or business. We want to give you the tools to help you build strong, long-lasting relationships with your patients and clients, helping meet their goals, improve their health, and achieve better outcomes. Learn more at www.rehabuppracticesolutions.com. We'll catch you on the next episode.